Hello everyone and welcome to Candy Cap Crochet. My name is Elliot. I am the owner and artist behind Candy Cap, and today I'll be taking you along with me as I do some product development for my new planner series. We're going to start by preparing the book board. My book board is 8.5 by 11 inches, but our book is only going to be 5.5 by 8.5. So we need to cut in the middle. I take my time measuring as I need this to be as precise as possible. Use an X-Acto blade and very carefully trace the line. I've noticed that when I use a ruler to lean against, I end up messing up more, so I've stopped doing that and now I just take my time and carefully trace it over with my knife. And then I do multiple passes, as trying to go through in one pass is a good way to end up cut. And just like that, we've got properly sized book board. Now here is the planner itself. As you can see, it's very cutesy, very demure. I designed it in Canva, and you'll notice that there's this white spot along the edges. This is a printing mishap, and I did try and fix it using the X-Acto blade to trim, but it just left a really jagged, raggedy edge, which I didn't like. I used a guillotine as well to try, as well as this little mini cutter, but neither worked out well. So that's why we do this product testing, essentially. I figured out there was a problem with the printing, my solutions didn't work, and so now we've gone back and we've adjusted all of our print settings to make sure we don't get that white line around the edge. Here we are preparing our end sheets. I use a 12 by 12 scrapbooking paper block, which needs to be trimmed to length. We'll be cutting it out to be 8.5 by 11 inches, as we will be folding this in half. You measure once, twice, 3 times. Once you cut paper, you can't go back, and unfortunately, I don't have a lot of this color. Once it's cut, we'll fold it. And then I just use a bone folder to get a nice crisp edge. Make sure it's all lined up and accurately sized before doing it again with the other sheet, so that we have 2 end pages to sandwich our book block. I'll keep this paper here because it'll become useful later. For example, I used it to create our punch guide with evenly spaced holes. There are 6 of them because I will be doing a French length binding. This involves 2 French length strips, with 2 ends for kettle stitch. And we're just going to go through and punch each hole into each signature using a 45-degree angle on our owl to make sure that everything lines up properly and it doesn't go out of whack. You'll notice there's not that many signatures for this planner so far. This is because I'm using a printer paper for this prototype. It's a lot cheaper than the nice heavy-duty paper that I'd usually use whenever I'm selling a journal. I like 105 to 120 GSM paper for anything I plan to sell. And with that paper, you need to use a lot less sheets per signature. Otherwise, you'll end up with some weird folding because the paper's too thick to get that crisp edge that I'm looking for when I've stuck all the sheets together. Since this is just thin printer paper, I can add a lot more sheets and a lot less signatures, which means it'll be quicker for me to do since I end up doing about 3 different prototypes of this planner before I'm satisfied with it. I'm only showing you one of them right now, but Since the filming, we have done 2 more full prototypes. Just like that, we've punched all our holes and make sure it's all lined up properly. Now we move on to the sewing. I'm picking out this beautiful purple embroidery thread to use for my binding. I measure it out against the width of the journal. And typically I like to do as many times the length as I have signatures, plus a little bit extra. And then I'll just wax this thread using this basic block of yellow beeswax. Waxing the thread before you bind with it makes it much stronger and therefore much more sturdy and better for a long-lasting journal. It also makes it easier to thread and work with. I especially go over the ends a few times each, as I want these to be nice and sealed together for threading onto my needle. I'll be using these curved bookbinding needles. They come in very long, but I prefer the very short ones. This is because I find it scratches and pokes the paper a lot less when I'm binding. You just thread it on, and then we'll tie a big knot at the end of the thread. It has to be big enough that it won't go through the holes we just punched. Please excuse the henna on my hands, by the way. There was a library program that I participated in at my local library where someone came in and did a bunch of henna for us all. It was super fun, but unfortunately, it's still on my hands while I'm filming this. We start from the outside and go in, making sure that knot catches properly before just weaving our way back and forth for this first signature. And yes, I am referring to these end pages as signatures. They're not technically, but since I'm sewing them with the signatures, we're just going to keep calling it that. I take my time when threading to make sure I don't tear the paper or have any knots or bubbles of thread stuck outside. You want things to be nice and tight and secure so that way we have the best stitch possible. Even though this is just a prototype, I'm not going to be compromising on quality, as it's good practice and it's fun. To tighten, I pull lengthwise along the way that I sewed instead of up and down. It prevents tearing, though it still can happen if you pull too tight. Now we'll start with the signature. We're working back to front for the book. So we'll go in and then out. And then it is time to make the first French link. The French link essentially just makes a bunch of little X's along the spine that hooks them together. It's more sturdy than only having connections along the ends, but less sturdy than Coptic bound, where each hole has a secured to the bottom signature, if that makes sense. I prefer using a French link stitch when I'm doing case binding. In other words, when there is the cover all the way around the journal instead of leaving an exposed spine. I'm certain you can do Coptic bound with case binding as well. I'm just not as adept at using it when I'm case binding things, so I prefer the French link. Here at the end, I'm tying these together. Normally, at the end of a signature, I would do a kettle stitch to secure and tie it off to the bottom signature. But since I can't do that with this very first signature, I'm just tying it. before going on to our next one. Again, I'm just pointing out that white edge that you won't be seeing if you will end up purchasing these planners that I'm making. You'll also notice that I've got a budget tracker page in there. I'm planning on having add-on pages that you can have worked into your planner, such as this budget tracker, meal tracker, health trackers, habit trackers, stuff like that, that you can decide to add on, which would be fully themed and fully worked into the journal, but not part of the standard one. This is because I know that I'm going to have to charge a healthy sum for these. As you can see, this is about 2.5 spread up, maybe 2, I believe. And it still takes quite a long time. There's a lot of expensive materials and time needed to make just a single journal. By offering these additional pages separately as add-on packages, I'll be able to charge less for the main journal for those who just need their key weekly and monthly threads. I'll be having multiple themes for the planner. This one is the cute planner. I'm also currently working on a shark and a dino planner, and I've got ideas for a few more. They'll all be formatted the exact same way, but with different icons, themes, colors, and designs. As I'm working on sewing, I just wanted to have a little chat. As you can see, this is my first time doing a voiceover. I didn't write a script, so I'm kind of winging this. I'd love to know what you think. Do you prefer me doing a voiceover? Do you prefer the videos where I have my writing instead to describe what I'm doing? Do you wish I wrote a script and I'm not winging this? I'd love to know what your thoughts are on my editing and how I'm doing these voiceovers, and as it's something I'm pretty new at, and I would love any feedback that you could give. Having a bit of trouble figuring out where the stitch aligns here. In case you were wondering, I do not currently have a release date set up for these planners. I'm obviously still working on them, and I might do another prototype, as I have been making these prototypes with a case binding, and I would like to see how it turns out if I did a Coptic exposed spine. I am more experienced with Coptic binding, and I find I tend to do a much neater and cleaner job when doing Coptic binding rather than case binding, which I'm pretty new to. I'm always looking to make the most professional and highest quality product for you guys, so I think I might want to do some more practicing with case binding before offering them, in which case I would do Coptic binding for the first releases, just to get it out quicker and give me more time to practice making case binds. As you can see, when I turn the spine, there's those rows of X's. That's the French link that I was talking about. And you'll see here the white is sticking out around the end page. That's because I cut the end page so that way it will match the final width once I fix the printing problem. I write down all the measurements that I will be using, as then I can bulk make things and cut out a bunch of papers all at once. I didn't want to write down the wrong measurements for what it would be after I fixed this printing error, so we just trimmed it slightly less. Now it's on to reinforcement time. I'll be using these binding clips just to secure everything as tight as possible before I add some glue. And yes, I am adding glue reinforcement to the spine. Some professional binders and binding companies will just use glue. I find this is particularly common in paperback books. Just using glue is called a perfect binding, but I personally don't like perfect bindings. I find it's not very perfect at all, and it's not super sturdy. Instead, I like to combine sewing and gluing. I just use my finger to work it into each of the gaps between the signatures, while being careful not to let the glue go too far in and stick the pages together. I'll set this aside to dry and build a mini jungle gym on top of it, just to keep everything pressed flat together. I do have a book press that I normally use, but this is actually too thin for me to put in my books. I'm using this linen book cloth. It's pink and is backed by paper, which just makes it a lot nicer as I can add more glue to create a firmer bond between my book board and the book cover. The paper protects the linen from staining with the glue, but I still need to be careful not to add so much glue that it soaks through the paper and damages the linen. I use these spacers to ensure that there is enough space for the book to fold around my book block. The T spacer is double the width of the book board. So my book board is about 2 millimeters. So this T spacer is about 5 millimeters, just to be safe. And the one without the T part is the width of the book block. I just mark this out using pencil so I know where to glue before adding a significant amount of glue to my book board. I don't have a glue brush. I sort of ruined the one that I had, so instead I'm just using this silicone glue smearer thing. It's not as even as a glue brush, I know, but it does the job, and it's a lot easier to clean. I always double check my measurements a good few times, especially when gluing, as there's not really any going back once it's fully glued on. So while the glue is wet, I just make sure it's nice before smearing and pushing it all into place. Again, we're double checking our measurements and ensuring that there won't be any problems when folding the book cover around the book itself. Before, once again, adding a lot of glue, spreading it out evenly, or as even as I can without a glue brush. I take extra care around the corners and the edges, and these need to be as secure as physically possible. Before putting it back with my measurements and ensuring everything is lined up as straight as possible. Here you can see me marking out where I'm going to cut the corners. By cutting corners, I can ensure I get very crisp corners on the final case. And yes, I'm doing some of it out of screen because I only have so big of a desk and not a ton of space. Now I'm just folding up some of that scrap paper from our pages. I trim it and fold it so that way it is the correct width. before gluing it in place along the spine. This is just going to be a bit of extra support for the spine, as I won't be gluing the book block spine to this part of the case cover. This just adds a bit more strength to it since it won't be against anything else. I'll be using these book corner clamps to help secure things once I've folded over and glued the edges to the book. Again, I realize I'm doing some of this out of frame. That is my bad. I just don't have a ton of space. One day I will have an art studio. What I am doing off frame is just adding the glue like so, smearing it nice and evenly, making sure to get those edges as much as possible before using my bone folder, which is actually a plastic folder, to crisply and evenly fold the edge over to make my final bookcase cover. I use these book clamps to hold things in place while it dries. And we just do this along each side. In the center here, I use my bone folder to crisply crease it around that paper stiffener in the middle. The paper stiffener is less thick than the book board, so if I don't do this, then there will be a gap there, and I don't want that. And just like that, the case cover is finished. I double check everything is smoothed out and even before setting it aside to dry. And now we'll go on to the book block itself and do some finishing touches. I make sure the alignment's correct before adding this pretty blue ribbon to be my bookmark. I add it before putting on the headbands. Sound off in the comments if that's the wrong thing to do, but it's worked for me so far, and I prefer the look of it seamlessly coming from within the headband rather than on the outside. I glue a chunk of headband just a bit wider than the book spine itself, so that way I have some overlap onto the other sides. I find this just looks neater and is more secure. Adding a headband means that I will have a nice, neat end, since this will be a breakaway spine, and you'll be able to see down the center of the spine. So instead of seeing the slightly uneven, messy spine when you're looking into the book, you're just going to see the headband. For those of you who don't know, headbands are just cord sewn onto a ribbon or onto the book itself. In the past, I've done homemade headbands where you just sew into the book itself to wrap around the cord, but I've started using this more professional headbands that I purchased. They're a little bit neater since they use a ribbon. Headbands are a bit fiddly, but it is 100% worth it. And I do use these binders clips just to make sure it stays in place with enough pressure as it dries. During this stage, I also add some more glue to the spine. I like to build up 2 to 3 layers of glue along the spine for reinforcements. And as a finishing touch for the book block, I'll just take a lighter and heat seal the ribbon. I don't need to heat seal this part because it is glued. Once everything's nice and dry, we will ensure everything still lines up perfectly and I didn't screw up anywhere. Before pressing open each sheet to ensure nothing is stuck together and that it is all perfectly aligned. It also breaks in the spine since I did glue it. In the meantime, the cover has also dried, so it's time to piece them together. I take these corner clips to clip the ends and round them off. Normally, I either do all pages with rounded corners or no pages with rounded corners, but I wanted to see what it would look like if I just rounded the part of the end pages that will be glued to the spine, to the cover rather. I thought it might look a little neater, and I honestly haven't decided if I like it better or not. Since this is just a prototype, I feel comfortable experimenting a bit. To glue the end pages onto the spine, into the cover rather, I use a lot less glue than I used to glue the book cloth to the book board. I still go pretty heavy along the edges, but I don't want to add so much glue that it will cause distortion in the paper and rippling. Making sure the edges and the corners are as firmly secured as possible is incredibly important. So I always go through and add just a bit of extra glue where I think is needed. Since this is a breakaway spine book, these end pages are the only thing that holds the book block in place in the cover. So I take my time to really secure them and let it dry as long as it needs. That way we don't have anything. And yes, you will again note that the white part is sticking outside of the case for the same reason that we had the slightly smaller end pages that show the white bit. I take the measurements and I don't want to write down the wrong thing just because of an error that I will be fixing in the future. We do the front inner cover just like we did the back one. And after some drying, we now have a finished planner. This is just a prototype as mentioned, but doing prototypes like this is super important for me to make sure I have a flawless product before I roll it out. I don't have a release date yet for these. Again, there's still some editing and tweaking even 3 prototypes later, but hopefully soon after my work fits my. And just like that, we are all done with this first prototype. I will see you next month for some market prep. Bye!